All right, all right. Happy Thursday, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. My special guest tonight is Dr. Jill Stein. She's the Green Party presidential candidate and her campaign manager, Jason Call. Welcome, Jill and Jason.
Pleasure. Pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So I guess I want to start, I'm going to ask both of you, since both of you were involved in this, I want to start with the arrest that happened at Washington University in St. Louis. I think a lot of us saw the video that went viral. I know I covered it on this particular show. Since both of you were involved in one of the college, protests, what do you think? I want to hear from you. What did you see on the ground versus what mainstream media is saying? Because mainstream media is obviously saying that the protesters were violent. That has not been the case here in Massachusetts, I can tell you. So mainstream media is obviously lying or exaggerating about this. What are some of the things that you saw and what actually led to the arrest? I'm going to start with Jill.
So this was a exemplary gathering of high-minded citizens who were exercising their constitutional rights of free speech and the right to protest, and they were giving voice to the deeply felt feelings and policies and preferences of the American people, not to mention also the International Court of Justice and the United Nations. So this was students doing nothing but advancing our ideals of human rights and justice and international law. It's like young people doing everything that is laudable and valuable in our society and our civilization. And on the other hand, we saw riot police creating a riot. Police in St. Louis have also been trained by the Israeli occupation forces. I presume they are also equipped by the 1033 program, which has militarized our police forces. And, we saw extremely fascistic police who had been called in by the University of Washington in St. Louis, and just acting in an extremely oppressive, brutal, anti-democratic, fascistic way. So, it was clear who the good guys were and who the violent and inhumane forces were between the university and the police, and the Boeing that the students were objecting to, the fact that the university has contracts with this war profiteer whose weapons are being used to kill innocent women and children. So it's like this was motherhood and apple pie. This was like wrapped in the flag, and and standing up for everything that is just and good. Specifically, and I'm going to just move my little kitty out of the camera because he likes to hug the camera. We were asked by the students to show support. We had been at a campaign event a couple blocks away from the university. Some students were there. They were eloquent and, very powerful. And when they asked us after our campaign meeting, would we come and show support for the encampment that had just been started that day, we said, hell yeah. It's like you're putting everything on the line, your career, your professional future, your graduation, your credits, your tuition, your safety, you're putting it all on the line. And are we going to support you? Yes, we're going to support you because, it's like no one could be putting out more than what they're doing to stand up for our democracy and our shared values for human rights. So yeah, we were there. They initially asked us to try to de-escalate with the administration, along with also the elected officials. There were 2 elected officials that were there from St. Louis, and we tried to talk, and then eventually the police were blocking us from trying to communicate further. They wouldn't let us actually go and speak to the administrators. And then as the things got more tense, the students asked us, would we please join the line to help discourage the worst of an assault, just because as a presidential campaign, we could help, bring the eyes of the world to this event. So again, we said, yes, of course. And they, they attacked us. The police assaulted us with bicycles well, a bike in particular that was used against the three of us, a bike that was used as a battering ram to try to push us over backwards onto our backs and our heads, to like make us fall down. And at the worst of that moment, when they were really pushing hard, the cop in front of me bent down, and you can kind of see this off in the side of the video, where he bends down and he's actually picking up my right foot. As I'm about to fall over backwards, he's picking up my foot, going in for the kill, for the final blow to like push me back on my head. And just, luckily, I was able to, just in my reflex to like recover my balance, I was able to shake him loose. And it was approximately at that time, and I can't say specifically what his words were. Jason may recall better than me, because I was so, consumed in the moment and just the struggle not to fall onto my head. But he said something to the effect that you're under arrest for assaulting a police officer, as he's assaulting us. And to me, it was like everything, it was just the worst of fascistic policing. And we were really caught up in the storm of that. Eventually we were knocked over, manhandled, zip tied with our hands behind our backs. We got up and walked to the paddy wagons, and eventually we were taken first for processing at the university and then at the county jail. And we were in a large group. There were 100 of us basically that were brought in, and it felt like there was some safety in numbers. But then at the very end of this process, when we thought we were getting out, I was diverted to go a different direction because I was being booked, and I was mugshot. I had a mugshot and fingerprints and a medical admission exam, and I thought they were going to keep me. And I just wanted to know, when could I call a lawyer? And there was one other person in that process, and that was the Middle Eastern history professor from the University of Illinois, who had just been there taking pictures. He wasn't even part of the line, and he was savagely mobbed by, I think, 4 cops at once who just came out of nowhere. He wasn't doing anything to anybody, and suddenly he was savagely attacked in a coordinated attack, knocked to the ground, and then eventually on the tape, on the video, you can see them knee dropping onto his stomach and his chest in a way that looked absolutely horrifying, like they were going to kill this guy. And he's the one, I hadn't seen the video, didn't know what had happened to him, but he too was accused of assault then, after having been, brutally assaulted by the cops. And he and I were separated off into a separate section. He also was booked. And then we were both released, and he went straight to the hospital and was admitted for like 9 rib fractures. He was very, he's lucky to get away with his life. And I wonder if we were also, because had they been able to, just push us over as they were trying to assault us, God knows what would have happened.
Yeah.
Aye. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah. The first thing I want to say is the Washington University administrators that we tried to engage in. There was one that was milling around the students, and we went over to him and we talked to him directly. The contempt in his face and the response to us, the dismissive response to us. He had no interest in de-escalation. And then the other guy who was, and his name was Kirk Doherty, I think. And then the other guy was Rob Wild. I think he was the director of student affairs there. He wouldn't engage with us at all. We actually approached, as Jill said, with the aldermen, including the president of the Board of Aldermen of St. Louis. We approached the police line because he was basically in a comfy chair, sitting, watching the whole thing as if he was watching a TV show, watching a sporting event. He had no interest in engagement, and the police told us that we had to get back from that line or they were going to arrest us on the spot. So this is me and Jill, our deputy campaign manager, Kelly, and the 2 alderwomen. And they were basically saying, back off. They wouldn't even let us approach him to say, will you talk to us and try and de-escalate this situation? Nobody wants violence. So when we walked onto the campus, my estimation is there were 60 or 80 cops already there from 4 to 6 different police departments in the area. And so when we linked arms with the students, and we saw the cops advancing on us, I was able to shoot about a 45-second video of them and that was where you see Jill looking at the camera as the cops are coming forward, and Jill is saying they're coming for us. And prior to that, I had looked at Jill and I said, "Are you ready to get arrested?" And she said, "Hell yeah." And I said, "Hell yeah, let's do it." I mean, we're here for justice. And the demands of the students were concrete: divest from Boeing. Boeing is manufacturing munitions that have been proven to be used in Gaza now at a nearby St. Charles plant. I think it's about 30 miles away from the university. And that's what the students wanted. The university is invested in Boeing, and they wanted divestment. And they have a right to demand that. They have a right as students to dissociate with that and demand a dissociation with that. But in terms of the students being violent, absolutely not. It's the most ridiculous charge in the world. And I do want to say that, and I think it was because we had identified ourselves as a presidential team when we tried to engage with the Director of Student Affairs, Rob Wild, that they knew who Jill was. When they advanced on us, there's no doubt in my mind. Before they even got to us, they pointed at her and said, she's under arrest. So they knew who she was. And not only was the cop on one side, on the far side of me, trying to pull Jill's leg out from under her, you'll see in the video a big, tall cop, county cop in a brown shirt, in a brown shirt, reaching over. And you don't actually see it in the video, but he has Jill's whole arm in his big hand, and he was trying to pull her. Now, I don't mind saying I was hitting on a cop. I was smacking his arm, and I said, "Get your hand off her. You're going to break her fucking arm." And I had to say that 3 times to him before he tried. At least he was trying to pull her towards him while the other cops were pushing a bicycle into her, pushing her backwards. It was such a violent and dangerous situation. It was amazing to me. And when they kind of finally broke the ground, broke the line, and they pulled me down, honest to God, I had a cop kneeling on my back, and I had an I can't breathe moment. And the only thing, because of the history of I can't breathe, the only thing that was going through my mind was I was absolutely terrified, and I was yelling at them, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." They finally got me up, and in my mind, the very first thing that I thought was, my God, George Floyd went through that for 9 minutes. And I probably didn't go through it more than 25, 30 seconds at the very most, but it was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. I was in fear of my life for that brief instant. Once they got me up, everything was okay. But the resolve and the resilience of these students was amazing. Just bless them for their actions. We got hauled into the paddy. Jill and I were among the first to get hauled out of there and put in the back of the paddy wagon. And once they had that paddy wagon loaded up, we all started singing "Free Palestine" in the back of the in the back of the paddy wagon. And then for the many hours, the 5 to 7 hours, 7 hours on my end, because I was one of the first arrested and one of the last released, that in that jail cell, the solidarity and the community and the resolve that we were there. We did the right thing. We did it for the right reason. Nobody was worried about it. They were like, in fact, there was one of the students in there. He was a freshman. He was 18 years old. And he was telling us how his parents were Zionists and they didn't know that he supported Palestine. And I said, "Well, dude, this is a hell of a way to come out." So, we would not have chosen. We were invited to be there, and we were proud to be there, and we would have not have chosen to do any other thing in that moment. But the police were violent, and the protesters were not, and it's quite clear from the video.
And this is what I was trying to tell, when Dr. West first announced his campaign and came on, we had this conversation about Joe Biden being a fascist. And this is one of the things I was saying to Dr. West back then, that it's not just Donald Trump that represents fascism. Fascism is happening under the Democratic Party as well. And a part of the reason why you have the police presence that you have is because Joe Biden did fund the police. He decided to give them more money. He still wants to give them more money even after these protests. And so the police, if you look around the country, the cop cities that are starting to pop up, this idea of militarizing the police. The first time that I saw that was actually under the Democratic Party. It was under Barack Obama when he sent the police, militarized police, into Ferguson. And a lot of people forget this. A lot of people focus on the George Floyd protest because that was under Donald Trump. But we got to remember that Barack Obama also sent in militarized police into Ferguson. This was after Mike Brown was killed by a police officer. So you have fascism on both sides.
And there's an article done by Ebony Magazine. We found an article about the idea, and just prior to, like 5 days prior to us being in St. Louis, we were in Atlanta, and Jill, and we were at the site of Cop City down there, of which there are almost 6 dozen in this country in some sort of phase of funding and construction. But you go ahead, Jill.
And I was just going to add that, this is under solid, practically wall-to-wall Democratic city administrations like in Atlanta. So, this is what fascism looks like. We don't need to wait for Donald Trump. It is alive and well right now.
And the Ebony article that I'm just referencing here identified that the IDF has been working with Georgia law enforcement to train police since as far back as 2011. So in this 2014 article that happened after Mike Brown murder in Ferguson, they identified that there are specific exchange programs, international exchange programs, not just in Atlanta, but in other police departments where they do law enforcement trainings that are done by the IDF. And so we want to know where these tactics, these fascistic tactics are coming from. You don't have to read very far to know.
Very well said. Well, there was an event, like actually after the arrest, you went immediately into another event, and actually my comrade, Nick Cruz from RBN, actually spoke on the panel with you, Jill. I want to hear a little bit about this event that took place there. And what was it like having both you and Nick on that panel? I know Nick was really excited, so.
Oh, it was really great. That was the first time we ever met in person. We've done a lot, a lot of virtual stuff and a lot of webinar stuff, but we never actually met. And it was amazing. It's always that way when you know people virtually, and then you meet them in the flesh, and they're even better. They're even more powerful than they were online. And yeah, it was just so great. I loved everything that he said. We were there with 2 students, who one was kind of part of the climate community and was Jewish and was just kind of beginning to find his way outside of Zionism and to oppose it, and and to become active against the genocide. And the other student, trying to remember what they were.
Campus feminist movement.
Yes, that's right.
On campus, yeah.
Yeah, working on this feminist campus, which kind of incorporated everything. And she was very, politically active and was all, entirely with the program. And they were both, really awesome and wonderful. And and the folks turning out were also just really on fire. And I'd say that's what we're seeing all over right now. A lot of students are very focused on the battles on their campus right now. So they're not coming out, for events outside of their campuses. They have their hands really full. But, usually a few of them are coming out as like ambassadors from their campus movement. And so they're like representing their movement. But the people who are coming out sort of for the event themselves, as opposed to the speakers, those are, like really interesting people. And for the most part, people who haven't been a part of green politics before. And so many people are just hitting their breaking point. But I have to say with Nick, it was just really great. And it felt like there was such a powerful collaboration going on, and that we were coming from exactly the same place. And it was just really uplifting.
Synergy in that room. Absolutely a synergy in that room.
It was great.
Yes, I thought it was awesome. Nick posted it on RBN, so I watched it. I was like, "Oh, this is so good! This is so great!" Again, for those who don't know, like when you actually finally meet someone in person, it's like a whole different feeling. Because like, a lot of us, we live in different states or, I mean, Jason's all the way on the West Coast. And so when you actually do get to meet some of the people that you talk to like virtually, when you get to meet them in person, it's like, whoa, and then I personally get to realize just how tall everyone is. So when I first see everyone in person, I'm like, everyone's so tall. You don't know it. They're sitting down on camera. You also received an endorsement from Jeffrey Sachs. Now, this blew my mind. I was not expecting this. I was shocked, but I was like, holy smokes, because this is a big deal. Number one, not just because Jeffrey Sachs is an economist, but also because he's a professor at Columbia University. So for him to give that endorsement when those encampments are happening at, Columbia University, I think it sends a strong message.
It's huge. Yes. And, he's been really outspoken about everything. But starting with, the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, it started at least in 2014, but, it didn't really go ballistic until, 2022. And he was very outspoken. And he was like one of the few people in the settled world, of academics who doesn't make any bones about it. I mean, he'll just say what he thinks, and he's very well informed. He's kind of had a front row seat in history since, like the 80s, something like that. So, he's been there, and, had a really powerful message about Ukraine. And he was one of the very few people to debunk the establishment, the political elites on this. And so I began really tuning into him and seeing him as just a huge resource for the anti-war community and the peace community and everything, actually, and also his point of view on COVID and the lab leak theory. He really lifted that up as kind of the person appointed by the Lancet, this very establishment, institution, this foremost medical journal recognized globally. And he was the guy kind of convening their review of what happened, and how did COVID get here? And is there kind of malfeasance at the policy level and the institutional level that got us here? We're U.S., medical and research institutions kind of a driver in this. And his work was really powerful and just turned lots of heads and made people start really thinking outside of the beaten pathway here about COVID and its origins. And that, even really made me respect him more. And then, on the whole Gaza-Israel thing, he's just been really very outspoken and principled, and just kind of like a North Star for lots of people and people who wanted more background and information. And I heard him maybe about 8 weeks ago. I heard him say that he was done with the Democratic Party, that he had basically stepped away. And I thought at the time, oh my God, how do we get in touch with him? Because if he's stepping away from the Democratic Party, he needs to be aligning with us, because, divided we're conquered. But if we kind of get together on this, we can make something happen. And I was still trying to figure out how to get in touch with him when I got an email from his wife with his just putting us on a distribution list for his articles. And I wrote her back saying, wow, this is really great. I'm a big fan. I've been trying to figure out, how to get on his pipeline. And then she wrote me back saying, well, we're big fans of you. And then I said, well, I'm going to be in New York next week. How about we get together and figure out how to stop the world from blowing up? And she wrote back and said, yeah, let's get together. And we did. And, it was just like, we are on the same team here. We are all of us really flat out here. And we understand that the world is blowing up, and that if we don't take really, extraordinary steps right now to stop the trajectory that we're on, the world is blowing up in many ways, not only war, nuclear war, climate, genocide, the economy's melting down. I mean, he really sees things exactly as we do, but coming from a very establishment and, academic perspective, which is kind of not where we're coming from. We're kind of coming from a much more grassroots activist perspective, but we completely converge. And his arguments and his experience really lend much more credibility. So, so he was like totally with the program when we got together and figured out how we could collaborate. And initially he felt like his positions kind of needed him to sort of keep things sort of low down. But I think as the genocide accelerated and the potential for the Middle East war to explode became more and more serious, I think he felt like we can't take a day for granted. We have to do everything that we can. And at that point, he basically, he wrote an op-ed endorsing us and sent it to me. I mean, it's like, he's such a good writer, and he's so well informed that, it was really a powerhouse thing. If you haven't seen it yet, I think it's posted on our website.
It's on our YouTube channel. Yep.
Mm-hmm. It's on our YouTube. Yeah. It's a really powerful op-ed. It's like war, Middle East, genocide, and the peace candidate. And it's like this totally, intensive coming out swinging really for our campaign, and why it's the only just and pragmatic thing to do, and that it's really urgently needed. And a lot of people he really opened the floodgates for a whole lot more endorsements and support. And, it takes courage, like the students on campus. It takes courage to, stand up and call out that the emperor has no clothes. And in fact, that the emperor is also committing genocide, and it takes courage to stand up and completely go against what the acceptable discourse is. Students are doing it. Jeff Sachs is doing it. And a whole lot of other people are doing it now too. And I'd say hold on to your hat, because it's going to be a four-way race. We're the only anti-genocide, anti-war, climate emergency, pro-worker campaign on track to be on the ballot across the country. We are the only one. There are other candidates with very similar agendas, but we are the only campaign that's actually well on our way. In fact, we have 75% of the total burden of signature collection done. So we are well on our way. We got a big fight in New York that I'd love to say a few words about before we're done today, where we, the people, can fight this. We can take on empire, and we can win this battle in New York where they are trying to stop us. But all that said, we are the one such campaign that will be on the ballot against three pro-genocide candidates, RFK, Trump, and Biden. They will split the pro-war, pro-genocide vote. We can unify the progressive vote. And when you're in a four-way race, it's possible to win that race with as little as 26% of the vote. You can then win a majority of the electoral college votes and actually win the election. So we're really trying to get people to raise the bar here, and to act with the courage of our convictions and with the just mind-boggling possibilities of this perfect storm that we are in for a massive political realignment and, an uprising, a political uprising that's actually in full swing right now. And, it should have a political dimension. It lives in the streets, it lives in the struggles in our daily lives, but it also has to live in the voting booth, especially now, because there really is the potential for this to be a black swan event and to even win the election.
That's right.
I have never said in my lifetime that there is an actual opportunity to win an election, as far-fetched as people may think it is. That door is open. It's never been open in the past, but it is open. Even if it's just a crack, it's open. And so we just have to lean hard into it, because we may not get another opportunity.
That's right. And speaking of ballot access, I'm going to pivot right back to you, Jason. I did see that you had a post where the New York Times apparently, I guess, is obviously releasing false information about your ballot access. Like I've told people over and over again, obviously the Green Party is the best chance to get the most ballot access across the country. Jill, if I remember correctly, when you ran in 2016, I believe you were in over 45 states, like on the ballot.
47. 47. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe that will happen again, if not more. I'm going to start with you, Jason, because you were the one that posted the tweet about the New York, I believe it was the New York Times lying about your ballot access.
I don't know that they're lying as much as they are misleading. And if they had just bothered to call the campaign and ask we never received any commentary or any request to discuss what the state of ballot access was for us. And so, the big glaring thing for us, which is very damaging to the campaign, is that we are actively petitioning in New York. And they published this big article that says that we have failed to qualify in New York. And for a newspaper that has the reach that the New York Times is, I mean, we've still got a month to go before we turn signatures in. And the fact that New York is such a massive lift force, that's damaging for us. I mean, I was angry and I was offended that they would do such journalistic malpractice. But it's not just that. Also, we have turned in signatures for Idaho. Idaho may not have published it yet, but we have done the work, and we were told by all of the counties that we petitioned in that we had the signatures. And just a phone call would have clarified that. And then they say the other thing is that they're in progress in Virginia and Delaware. Well, the truth is we're in progress all over the country. The only states that we are not in progress right now are the 3 states that petitioning hasn't started in, which is Minnesota, Rhode Island, and Tennessee. Their start dates are not until the earliest is the 12th of this month. So just to say, oh, look, we're in progress in these 2 states and leaving all of that wipe on the map, it leads people to think that we're not working for the rest of those states, and we are. We're almost ready to turn in signatures in Alaska, Nevada, and Ohio. And by the way, that's going to put us over 270 by a long shot in terms of electoral college votes. So I thought it was journalistic malpractice. It was misleading. I don't know if they intended to do that. My suspicion is that they probably did, because they do see us as a real threat. And so I thought it was pretty disgusting.
Yeah, I want to add too, and I'll pivot to you, Jill. One thing I noticed is they keep writing these articles about RFK Jr.'s ballot access. It's really interesting because this is someone who doesn't have anywhere near as much ballot access as you have. So it's just really interesting to me. It's obvious they're still trying to have some type of a blackout. I was surprised to see you on CNN after that arrest. I was really surprised that they brought you back on mainstream media. But I think they are starting to realize, there are a lot of voters out there, particularly younger voters, who do not want to support Joe Biden. I've spoken to people on the ground who supported Joe Biden in 2020 who don't plan to vote for him this time around. Because of his position on Gaza. Some of them have told me even if there were to be a ceasefire tomorrow, they're still not going to support him because of how long this has gone on and how many people have died. What's your position in reference to, Gaza, and what do you think should happen in reference to Israel and the relationship that the government of Israel has with the United States? And why do you believe that RFK Jr. is actually even further to the right of Joe Biden when it comes to Israel?
Yeah. So first about the U.S. and Israel, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, maybe said it best, which is that Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the U.S. In the Middle East. It is basically our outpost for a military, base writ large, controlling Middle Eastern oil. This is our place to hang our hat in the Middle East. Back in the 1980s, we needed that oil. Now we don't. We're the world's leading exporter of fossil fuels, but we want to control the world's oil. Why do we want to do that? Because we have a foreign policy summarized by the Pentagon in the words full spectrum dominance. We intend to dominate all possible areas of contention, whether they're economic or military, in all dimensions. So from the battlefield to the surface of the ocean to under the seas to the skies, cyberspace, outer space, we want to dominate all regions, in all dimensions. This has been articulated over and over again since the 1990s, when the U.S. basically first asserted that we will not allow a competitive power to rise, even on a regional basis. So it's very important that we control the world's oil supply. And, this is catastrophic. This is why we have been losing war after war, $20 trillion at least, and at least 4 to 6 million lives needlessly lost since the 9/11 wars began. 1 million in Iraq, 1 million needless deaths, but in the post-Iraq wars, it's more like 4 to 6 million. According to the Brown Cost of War project at Brown University, the U.S. is now conducting so-called anti-terror operations in 85 countries around the world. We are in a constant state of war, even the wars that you don't hear about. We're in a constant state of war. This is why half of our congressional budget is being used on essentially the endless war machine. So, this is kind of the heart of empire, and why empire is not only endangering us and the rest of the world, but also us, because these conflicts, which can go nuclear, any of three of them could be going nuclear in the blink of an eye right now, between China, Ukraine, and Israel. These are potentially nuclear conflicts. So these are dangerous. No conflict now is somewhere else, in somebody else's backyard. They can all go nuclear, and when they do, it doesn't matter where the bombs are going off. When you get to a significant nuclear exchange, and it doesn't take very much to do it, you get into nuclear winter, which is global and can wipe us all out. One nuclear armed submarine, and we have 14 of them, a single one contains the equivalent of 5,000 Hiroshima bombs, which is enough to set us into, serious nuclear winter. And it's basically the end of civilization as we know it. And our leaders are reckless and clueless. They don't have any concerns about nuclear weapons or even about escalating conflicts, which is why you see them, things are going the way that they are. But, in terms of why is the U.S. In this position with Israel? Because Israel is one of those strategic allies. And unfortunately, we think we are the monopolar, empire dominating the world, but we're no longer in a monopolar world ruled by one country. We're in a multipolar world where many countries, are sharing power. And in fact, the BRICS Association, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and some Middle Eastern countries, their economic power now exceeds ours. Our curves have crossed. So we're kind of, our clueless criminal leaders are living in another era. They're living inside of their heads. They are not in the 21st century. They're kind of maybe in the 20th century, and they need to get with the program, because what they're doing is extremely dangerous. And the other question you raised, was that about RFK?
Yeah, why is he to the right of Joe Biden on Israel? It's getting weird.
Oh, it's very weird. I mean, it gets weirder and weirder, and not only on policy around Israel and the Middle East, but in many policies. RFK claims to be, supporting campaign finance reform and cleaning up our elections. But, listen to what I say, not to what I do, because he's being funded by a super PAC with 2 very big donors, and then he appointed a billionaire running mate. So, he's relying on big money to run his race. But it looks like that's why he got all mobilized around Israel. He fundraises with the biggest Zionist fundraisers out there. Sheldon Adelman's, no longer in this world, but his widow is a very big, Zionist and fundraiser and donor. And RFK has been, doing fundraisers with her and other Zionists. And, he, at one point, suddenly he had this big coming out for all things Zionist and all things Israel, and declaring the Palestinians the most pampered people in the world, while they're being just slaughtered on an industrial scale. His cluelessness and insensitivity are pretty mind-boggling. And the fact that he still presents himself as being a peace candidate, as though the Middle East war doesn't count. I mean, how do you come off with that? Because the Middle East is a war now. It's an enlarging war where the U.S. and Israel are bombing some 5 or 6 countries between the two of us. Israel is trying to drag us into a war with Iran. Iran is, in an alliance with Russia. And this could go global very easily, in the blink of an eye. This is probably the most dangerous war that we are involved in right now. And RFK is describing himself as a peace candidate while he, supports what's at the heart of this war. I mean, all these conflicts in the Middle East would go away if Joe Biden would simply pick up the phone and act like a commander-in-chief and instruct Israel to cease and desist from the genocide and the occupation and the ethnic cleansing. It could all be stopped in the blink of an eye, as Dwight Eisenhower did in the 1950s. I think it was 1956, when Eisenhower instructed Israel to get out of Egypt. And Israel did. And Ronald Reagan did that in like 86, I think, telling Israel to get the hell out of Lebanon, where Israel had gone to chase the PLO, which was, the Hamas of an earlier era. And it's so infuriating to hear, the apologists in the State Department saying that, we have to eliminate Hamas because their charter at one point, was very, anti-Israel, and it was a diehard opponent of Israel. Well, their revised charter is not. And by the way, they just signed a peace agreement, and they just agreed to put down their arms, which Israel has not agreed to. So let's be clear, this is just BS. This is just, ethnic cleansing, which was the game plan from the very start. And, my message, particularly to other Jews who were raised, my background is Jewish, and I was raised as an implicit Zionist. Everybody was an implicit Zionist because the Palestinians basically didn't exist. This was a land without a people and a people without a land, and we weren't supposed to know about anybody whose human rights were being abused. But even as people began to wake up to what was going on, it wasn't crystal clear. People did not accept what the Palestinians were saying and believed that this was a refuge that was being sought by Jews who, are a traumatized people and lost 6 million people in the Holocaust. And my grandparents were refugees from pogroms. And, so there's a lot of trauma there, as there is if you scratch the surface in many people, African Americans, how about, or, indigenous people anywhere. There's a lot of trauma, and the solution to trauma is not armed encampments, and ethno-states, ethno-nationalist states. That doesn't really get us security for anybody. But, my message in particular to people who were raised like I was as implicit Zionists is to understand that there was a massive amount of historic material that was declassified in the 1990s. So in the 1990s, it became really well documented within material possessed in the Israeli National Archives that, in fact, there was a terrorist plan of ethnic cleansing from the get-go, from even before the founding of the State of Israel. There was a terrorism plan of committing violence against civilians, of destroying villages, and basically clearing people out to make room. So this was an inherent plan of ethnic cleansing, which then leads to genocide invariably. So there was a problem here from the get-go. It's not like Hamas started this on October 7th or that the PLO started it before that. From the beginning, there was massive, massacres, destruction of villages, ethnic cleansing that was going on even before the Nakba, and then massively in the Nakba in 1948. And so it's very important for this to be discussed. And, if you were around in the 1960s, you would have seen that it was very difficult when Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or, the Southern Christian leadership, any of the civil rights movements who were bringing up the issues of white supremacy and racism. White people did not want to hear it. And it made us very uncomfortable and made us fearful. And all the reasons that are being, claimed by Zionists on campus that they're uncomfortable. Well, sometimes you just have to be uncomfortable because history is uncomfortable, because there's information you need to come to terms with. There's a reckoning that needs to go on here. And it's so similar in my experience to what went on in the civil rights movement. And in fact, civil rights, information was banned on campuses. That's what the whole Berkeley free speech movement was about in '64, an explosion on the campus because people were being arrested for sharing information about racism and white supremacy in the South at the time. And there was a big mobilization to be a part of that struggle. And it was being viciously suppressed on campuses, and there was a free speech movement around it in very much the same way that there's a free speech movement now around the discussion of Zionism, and Zionism and anti-Semitism really has been weaponized in order to silence a political discussion that urgently has to happen right now, not only because of realities in this country and what this is doing to our civil liberties and our freedom of speech, but also what is happening in Israel and Gaza now has everything to do with that. And this has to be stopped in its tracks. And as part of that discussion, to understand what's going on here now, we have to be able to talk about Zionism.
That's right. I think sometimes I'll pass it to you, Jason. I think sometimes people do forget that, I know I wasn't alive during that time, but my grandparents had explained this to me, that the civil rights movement during that time was not popular. So it's not always about, doing what everyone else is going to accept, or more so what the media is going to accept, or what our government thinks is the right thing to do, because our government has been wrong on a number of issues, and they were late to the table when the people were correct. The college students had it right. The college students had it right against, protesting against the war in Vietnam. They had it right about, the civil rights movement. It was our government that was late to the table. So people have to always remember that. Go ahead, Jason.
They had it right about apartheid in South Africa, too. And just to kind of bring it back to RFK, we would love to have this debate with RFK in public. He rejected our outreach to a debate about 6 weeks ago, saying that we don't have time for it. We're focusing on ballot access. But he just put out this tweet yesterday about wanting to debate Trump and Biden. So I reached out directly to his campaign manager as soon as I saw that. And I said, okay, so you're ready to debate? We are ready to debate you. We want to have this public conversation, and we want to expose RFK for who he really is on Zionism. And the response that I got back was, no, we're not going to do it. But now the excuse is basically you're not polling high enough, and if that was kind of the way it was categorized. But this is an opportunity to say that some polls have come out recently in the last couple of weeks that have shown a Wisconsin CBS poll put us at 22% for 18 to 30-year-olds, which is absolutely phenomenal. And that was in a three-way race: Stein, Trump, Biden. We're polling at 22%. And then a new one was just put out by Quinnipiac, and we are polling at 13% in a five-way race that includes West, Stein, RFK, Trump, and Biden. So this is really significant. The movement is growing, and I do want to put out there that while we were polling at 13% in that same demographic, Cornel West was polling at 3%.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think RFK Jr. and I, the first, eye roll for me was when he said he would debate Max Blumenthal, and then he decided not to do that. That was a very mask off moment. So I told people to start paying attention to that. Then he doesn't want to have this conversation with anyone that's really going to challenge him on Israel, particularly someone who, Jill Stein is Jewish, particularly someone like Jill or Max, who they actually are Jewish. He does not want to have that conversation. So he's avoided all of that. And I'm just like, yeah, we're supposed to believe that you're going to push back against the establishment. You are the establishment. RFK Jr.'s campaign is this idea of an independent campaign, but it's really not independent of the two parties when you look at the establishment piece. He is still very much a part of the establishment, and that's why he's not willing to, in my opinion, push back on Israel as much as he could. One of the questions I do have for you, Jill, is about executive order. So one of the things we've been pretty critical about, of course, to President Biden is that there are a number of things that he could have done by executive order that he decided not to do. One of the easiest ones, or the biggies, I think, is to obviously legalize recreational marijuana. And that's something that I think people of both parties, Republican Party and Democratic Party, actually support. But he's not willing to do that. If you were president of the United States, what are some of the policies that you would implement by executive order?
Yeah, and let me tell you, this is part of our day one agenda. Okay, so it starts with ending all transfer of weapons and aid to Israel and potentially other human rights abusers like Saudi Arabia too, but for sure with Israel. So the genocide is over on day one. We would free Julian Assange and Edward Snowden and Leonard Peltier and other political prisoners. We would also provide amnesty to all the incarcerated people who are serving time for the simple possession, use, or cultivation of marijuana and actually other substances as well. We would legalize cannabis, and we would begin a process of legalizing all drugs, or shall we say decriminalizing initially all drugs, so that drug use or misuse is dealt with as a public health problem, not as a criminal problem. So that all begins on day one, including the legalization of marijuana, and probably psilocybin would be thrown in there as well. We would declare a climate emergency on day one, so that at that point it becomes possible to shut down this development of fossil fuels that impact the coastline at all, because the coastlines can be regulated on an emergency basis. So Joe Biden has authorized 22 liquid natural gas export facilities, and most of these were approved in the wake of the Nord Stream sabotage, the most destructive act of environmental sabotage ever in history, yet it's gone uninvestigated. In a rather suspicious way. We've not investigated that, whereas spray painting, the exterior of a coal plant, and you are an environmental terrorist, or doing so to a pipeline, you're a terrorist and you're going to jail for maybe 10 or 20 years. But this worst act of environmental terrorism, nothing happens on that. So anyway, Biden has approved these 22 LNG export facilities, and liquid natural gas, or methane, is the most destructive fossil fuel out there by far. And according to the Sierra Club, these 22 export facilities are the equivalent of, get this, building 440 new coal plants. It knocks back all progress on climate reductions, on climate emissions reductions. It knocks it back to the year 2005. It actually far outstrips anything that Trump has done, any harm that Trump has done to the climate. Biden actually leaves that in the dust with the approvals that he has been given to these LNG plants. So at any rate, they all stop. They grind to a halt on day one, because any fossil fuel development that impacts the coastlines, and all these are on the coastline, as well as the pipelines that feed them, which impact low-income communities, communities of color, indigenous lands, water supplies all over the country. They also come screeching to a halt. And at the same time, we can unleash then hundreds of billions of dollars through these emergency funds to begin creating jobs in the Green New Deal, to basically transfer those communities that have been depending on fossil fuels, to move them over to the development of renewables or coastline protections, environmental restoration, the Climate Jobs Corps, and that kind of thing. We can begin funding that. So we can actually put money where our mouth is on the Green New Deal. That all starts on day one. those are some of the main things that, where executive orders can be used. But there's also another executive power, which is not so much an order as a power of the office. In the office, one has enormous communications power and potential. And Barack Obama had a large grassroots army that helped him make breakthroughs and get into office. But his first act, even before he was sworn in, his first act was to announce that Larry Summers, was going to be his Secretary of the Treasury, ensuring that Wall Street was actually his priority. Sorry, folks, and it became clear at that point that his ground troops were being sent home. He wasn't going to be using them because now he's working for Wall Street and not for you. But with us, we're not going to be working for Wall Street, because our agenda is diametrically opposed to Wall Street. So our only hope actually is our grassroots army. So we will use the office not to be the usual commander-in-chief, but to be the organizer-in-chief, so that we will hold our elected officials, our congressmen and women, senators, will hold their feet to the fire. We will bring back the institution of town hall meetings and shame elected officials into meeting with their constituents and actually representing them rather than the lobbyists and the donors. We will also bring back congressional hearings so that the American public will be informed about, why Medicare for all, for example, is a slam dunk. It's a no-brainer. It will save us $500 billion and it will deliver healthcare for you. So we can help gin up our policies that we want to pass instead of being, just kind of this passive vessel, which is how, the White House functions currently. It's just a conduit for a corporate agenda. We will continue to act as organizers, using all the advantages of the office to drive an agenda. And the first thing on that legislative agenda actually will be an improved Medicare for all system, because it is motherhood and apple pie, and it saves us $500 billion a year. So this is kind of first up on our agenda.
And if I can say on that note, we do have the platform just about ready to release. So we're putting the finishing touch. I see a lot of policy questions, and Jill, I want to say we're going to have it released on Saturday when we do the live stream. So that is certainly the goal.
Yes, I was just about to go into that. I see Jason. Jason must be looking at the chat. But one of the questions I did have, so this one has come up quite a bit, is about reparations. Obviously, Jill, I know you and I've had this conversation before. I know you support reparations. Some people are wondering, like, what type of, what would your idea of reparations be for descendants of slaves in this country? And will that be a part of your platform as well?
Yes, absolutely. And, we believe that the community being repaired, gets to call the shots here. And for the most part, I think what we're hearing is that people very much want cash reparations and, a cash payment in whatever terms that they want. If they want a one-shot, boom payment or a series of payments over a period of time, this is up to the community, but our intention is to put real dollars behind this. And the current thinking is that the debt owed, and this is a debt for labor, uncompensated, a debt for building the infrastructure of this country, as well as a debt for, life and liberty denied. So, the thinking is that this is many trillions of dollars, on the order of, I don't have my notes in front of me, but it's on the order of $8, $10, $12 trillion that the current thinking is for these reparations to be paid.
Well said. Awesome. Well, so looking forward to that on the platform as well. And then one more question I do have for you as well, Jill, in reference to, pull up my notes here, sorry. Constitutional amendments. So this is something that I think a lot of people may not be familiar with, and that is Move to Amend. So this website actually needs more attention from people. Move to Amend, they have proposed amendment to the Constitution, where we the people amendment. And this is talking about, obviously how they say that corporations are people, et cetera, like, or count as people, that type of situation. A move to amend has been, I would say, a stronger effort than in Citizens United, where they really want the corporate money completely out of electoral politics. Would there be any type of push from you in reference to a constitutional amendment, pushing forth a constitutional amendment that basically says that corporations are not people and money is not speech? Because that's for people who don't understand, that's part of the reason why these corporations are able to have such a strong hold on politicians in our country as it is right now. Do you see yourself pursuing some type of constitutional amendment that can get the corporations out and say that money is not speech?
Absolutely. And, this is part of our democracy agenda, because our democracy is in absolute all-out crisis, and getting the money out of politics and getting the people back in, getting the corporations out and getting the people back in is absolutely critical. And I have been a strong supporter of move to amend, going back as long as I've been aware of it, certainly before 2012, the first time I ran for office at the national level. So yes, definitely, we would be fully in support of this. And, a whole series of, a strategy to try to push this, because constitutional amendments are not easy to achieve. There is an effort right now to lay the groundwork for repealing Citizens United and getting states to hold non-binding referendums about this. And that's a great idea. There's a great set of strategies that are being used. But as you point out, the problem is much bigger than Citizens United. I think we can also challenge, corporate personhood as well. When corporations were first, authorized in this country, they had to renew their charters like every 10 years or so. They had to have a charter serving the public interest. They weren't just like these entities that are like robots, which are immortal and never die and have all these superhuman powers. We can, strip them back down to size. And I think that needs discussion. I don't think this is part of our agenda yet, but this is like kind of a recurring theme among Greens about, how do we dismantle corporations and their power? And that is something we've long talked about, is, sort of reactivating corporate charters and insisting that they get approved every 10 years, so that we're controlling the corporations instead of the corporations controlling us.
Okay, so one more for both of you, and I think a lot of people want to know this one. Any ideas or any announcement that you're ready to make about who you think your running mate will be? There have been a lot of speculations. I think people have their own picks for your running mate. I think some people, they were hoping that you and Dr. West would run together. Obviously, it doesn't look like that is going to be likely. But any ideas of who your running mate would be, or the type of running mate that you are looking for?
I think that the pairing that we did in 2016 with Ajamu, Baraka, and myself, that was a wonderful ticket. And we just brought a whole lot of diverse energy together that was just so synergistic. And to my mind, that's kind of like a model. And, so I would just say that whoever it is, they're not going to look like me, and, be as different as possible. So I think that's about all I could say right now. Jason, do you want to add anything to that?
I will just say that, it's a decision that takes a lot of deliberation. And I want people to be confident that the right person will be revealed at the right time, and and it will be the right team. So if people can just have confidence in that. The person has not revealed themselves yet, but we have a short list, and we have feelers out, and we have had some discussions with people, and reaching out to somebody who you think would be a good pick and saying, hey, would you be interested in this? Sometimes that does not always come back with the answer that, it's not the right time for them. So all sorts, there's so many factors involved in this, but just to say, when it comes down to it, it's not going to be the wrong person. It will be absolutely the right person, and people will know it. And if there was any last thing that we could address before we wrap up, it is the fact that we are working hard for New York State right now. Michael Pan, hi, Michael. The question is, what is the ground game in the interim? Well, the ground game is ballot access. We are working really, really hard on getting ballot access in New York. As you know, it's a $45,000 signature requirement. We have committed a substantial amount of money to paid petitioners in New York. They are working hard right now. The deadline is May 28th. If you are in New York and you at all want to help with this effort, please get in touch with the Green Party of New York, get in touch with the Stein campaign, help us out with signatures. We are confident we're going to make it. And then the sort of ripple effect from us being on the ballot in New York, and we will be the only progressive campaign on the ballot in New York. Claudia and Karina are not petitioning in New York. And I don't want to throw shade on Dr. West, but we don't think from our assessment that he's going to make it in New York. So if a progressive campaign, a left campaign gets on the ballot in New York, it will be us, and we're pretty confident we'll do it. But that will have massive ripple effects in helping us get on the ballot in every other state in the country. New York is the linchpin for our campaign in terms of ballot access right now.
And think of New York as like the empire's last stand. This is where they're really trying to cut us off at the pass. This is a secret provision that was buried in the budget in 2022. Nobody knew about it. It wasn't debated. And this was Andrew Cuomo's effort to ensure that he wouldn't have to face a third-party challenger again, whether it was the working families or anybody. He was just going to keep everyone off the ballot. And that's what he's done. So they've created this requirement, 45,000 so-called valid signatures. That means that the signature on the petition has to match exactly the signature with the voter registration. So if you registered to vote with your middle name, but you only write your middle initial on the petition, the name can be thrown out. And New York, or rather the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, has hired an army of lawyers. They've been proud to announce they're so clueless. They just admit how corrupt they are. They've hired an army of lawyers to try to nitpick us off the ballot and basically just eliminate their competition because they can't, fight us in the realm of the contest of ideas. They have to try to, use dirty tricks to get us out of the way. And so we have to collect not just the 45,000, you've got to double it because of the dirty tricks. We got to collect 90,000 in 6 weeks. This is very, very difficult. This is the most difficult state of all. So this is where they rely on sidelining us. We have 75% of the total signatures done. We are on in just about all of the other difficult and large states in particular. So New York is their last stand where they try to block us. So if you want genocide to stop, to be front and center in this election, that depends on our getting on the ballot in New York, because otherwise the establishment will sideline you and mainstream media won't pay attention to you. They will use one state as the excuse for not covering you and saying, you're not a credible, full bore candidate. So for us to have a really full powered challenge to empire, we need to be on in New York. If you live near New York, or not even near New York, but you're willing to come into New York and carry a petition and talk to people, we're doing this in groups, so it's fun. We go to farmers markets, we go to festivals and collect signatures. If you would like to help ensure that genocide is going to be front and center in this election, because otherwise it won't be even, mentioned or discussed. If you want to get genocide and war and the climate crisis, and the workers' agenda, because otherwise that won't be in the.
Let me do a shout out to Eric and corruption on the ballot.
Corruption, all of it. Pick your favorite issue. It's not going to be there. If you are a progressive, if you are not a creature of Wall Street and the war machine, you want us on the ballot. And to get your issues on the ballot, come and lend a hand, because this is an absolute perfect storm now for challenging empire at a time when people have never been more fed up with being thrown under the bus, when more people, there have never been so many people who are clamoring for another option. This really is a perfect storm for changing power and challenging power. So I really encourage you, if there was ever a time to kick in, this is it. This is a potentially winnable election. And if we stand up and fight with the courage of our convictions, we can do this. We have the numbers. Remember, it's 68% of Americans who abhor this genocide and want to shut it down right now. So on genocide, we would win. On healthcare as a human right. On housing, half of all renters right now cannot afford to keep a roof over their heads. Half of all renters are paying more than 30%. In many states, in New York, for example, it's more like 50%, 60% of your income is going to your rent right now. It's just outrageous, because it's the real estate industry that's calling the shots, and the policies generate maximum profit. So if you want to fix this stuff, know that we have the numbers. We have the numbers. We have the agenda. We have the moral imperative of this moment, of this era to stand up and stop genocide. We can make that happen in this race. If we stand up with the courage of our convictions and we don't allow this mindless propaganda that we're powerless, to get under your skin, just tune it out. As Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. We have to bring that demand to the political discourse. We are the ones we've been waiting for. And as Alice Walker said, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have the power. We have the numbers. We have the moral authority here. All we need is the courage of our convictions to do this, to stand up together, and we will be unstoppable if we do that. So please come and join us and go to jillstein2024.com, and you can, drop a note through the portal. You can sign up to volunteer on Ballot Access, and just clarify in your note that you can come to New York, or you're ready to come, or you already live there, whatever, and we will scoop you up, and we will be, right back at you right away to make this happen.
Awesome. Dr. Jill Stein and Jason Call, thank you both so much, and good luck.
Thank you. Great to talk with you, Sabby, as always.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.